The following video is brought to you by YouTube, a holocaust of fun. So I just got done playing Sonic X Shadow Generations, and it was... okay. Is it, as the kids say, peak? No, not really. Is it the best 3D Sonic game? No. Did it have anything interesting to say about Shadow as a character? Well, that's what we're here to discuss. Shadow is back in the limelight. His past has once again come back to haunt him, and he's reunited with old friends and old enemies. Sounds like the basis for a great story. Let's get into it. I think the game has a pretty strong start, all things considered. Shadow's back on the Ark, he runs into Black Doom, the Time Meter shows up, Shadow wakes up in white space, and spots someone in the distance. Someone he holds dear. But he steels himself, and focuses on the mission. That's my goat. Omega's here! That's it. Orbot and Cubot are here! That's it. Shadow is Venom now. Alright. Hey look, it's the Bio-Lizard, I know what that is! Shadow punches Black Doom in the eye. That's what he gets for making me find 60 gun soldiers in the Doom, you fucking psychopath. But now we get to my main problem with this story. Gerald and Maria. Yes, they're back, and that's really about it. Gerald and Maria add nothing to this story. If anything, I think they actively take away from it. Shadow as a character has been written pretty decently up until he meets Gerald and Maria again. But I feel he's kind of reverted back to the way he was in SA2, even wanting to find a way to change their fate. Now on paper that's not an awful idea. Shadow has moved on from his past, but if he had a second chance, who's to say he wouldn't want to save them? But the problem lies in the execution of that idea. This plot point is dropped until the very last cutscene of the game. Gerald and Maria have no real presence in this story. They're here so they can disappear at the end and make everyone cry. And the ending is tastefully done, but it feels hollow. What should have been the emotional core of the story feels like a complete afterthought. This could have been a genuinely interesting concept that challenges Shadow's development and growth as a character, but instead it makes him take a step back. The whole point of his arc was that he stopped caring about the past. It no longer defined who he was. The Shadow from SA2 is dead. Shadow is his own person now, free from the shackles of the past. That doesn't mean he stopped caring for Maria and Gerald, but he doesn't need them anymore. I've seen people talk about how the story is about dealing with trauma, and while I don't disagree, I don't think the game succeeds in effectively conveying that idea. There's a few nice moments, but the ending didn't sell me on the idea that Shadow has embraced his trauma and moved on. To me, it felt like they just piled on more trauma, especially with the way Shadow reacts to losing Gerald and Maria again. That's not to say he can't be sad about it, but I don't think it reaches its full potential. Maybe Black Doom makes Shadow a deal. If Shadow lets him carry out his plan, he'll use the distortion in time to create a timeline where Maria and Gerald never died. Shadow can live happily, finally free from all the pain and the loss. Maybe Shadow rejects that idea, refusing to live a lie. Maria and Gerald are gone and he can't change that. He won't change that. He won't be manipulated again. After all this time, he's free to make his own choices and he won't give that up again. Maybe Maria is the one who needs help. Maybe she desperately wants to keep Shadow safe. Maybe she worries about a world where she's not around to look out for him. And maybe Shadow is the one to comfort her. To tell her that he'll be okay without her. That she's the one who saved his life and set him free all those years ago. He can live because of her. Maybe instead of Shadow wanting to change Gerald and Maria's fate, they're already aware of their fate. And Shadow has to guide them through that pain and put their minds at ease. Finally getting the chance to say goodbye on his own terms. The problem I have with this story is that it has no foundation, no structure. The closest thing Shadow has to an arc in this game is him learning to let go of his anger. But that idea is introduced in one cutscene and then resolved in the very next cutscene at the very end of the game. It also doesn't help that Gerald and Maria just aren't very interesting, at least in how this story utilizes them. Gerald was a complicated man who had everything taken away from him. He manipulated Shadow just as much as Black Doom, but none of that is really brought up. I understand it's Gerald from an earlier point in time, but Shadow is strangely relaxed around him. You'd think there'd be something to say there. Maria also doesn't add anything. She was always kind of a plot device, but it worked because she's the driving force behind Shadow's actions. She doesn't need to be interesting because so much of who Shadow is because of Maria's influence. She lives in him. But when you actually have her along for the adventure, you gotta give her something interesting, give her more of a personality. It worked in her earlier appearances because we never know how much of Shadow's memories are real. It added this mysterious element to him. this idea that he was fighting for something that even he didn't know was real. But here she's just kind of nice, which is fine. I just wish she had something more. There's a decent moment where she stands up to Black Doom, but that's about it. I also think this game kind of undermines the tragedy of her death. See, in SA2 it's implied that Maria grew up on the Ark. Her dream was to one day see the world, a dream that was taken from her. It made her relationship with Shadow much more poetic, since Shadow is the one who has to make that dream a reality. He protects the planet that Maria never got to see. But this game tells us that she grew up on Earth and has only been on the Ark for a short amount of time. It's obviously not the end of the world, but I think this is the problem with constantly looking back at what the series has done in the past instead of looking ahead to the future. When you start changing things that were already established, you run the risk of breaking things beyond repair. And I'm not saying this is what happened here, but I personally felt that this story made Shadow's past way less interesting and emotionally resonant. Shadow was always shrouded in mystery, but when you keep adding more and more details, the mystery isn't as fun. Kind of like peeking behind the curtain or opening your Christmas presents early. It's like going from a young Bruce Wayne to Batman. You can explore the time in between, and many stories have, but I think there's just as much value in what we don't see. Anyway, Black Doom is also back to do something. They don't really explain what he's gonna do, but boy howdy he's gonna do it. We're told that he plans to take over Shadow's body by manipulating his new Doom powers, but that's really it. And even then, there's no time to flesh that idea out. This could have been a story about Shadow accepting that Black Doom will always be a part of him. He'll never truly escape, but he can still choose to embrace who he is and all that comes with it. But no, not really. During my playthrough, I was thinking a lot about the opening of Sonic Unleashed. Pretty weird, I know. But I was thinking about how despite all the amazing spectacle, it also has a ton of setups that get paid off later in the story. We open with Super Sonic fighting Eggman before the Chaos Emeralds are drained of their power. Sonic is saved by Chip, who's lost his memory. Dark Gaia splits the planet into pieces. Then by the end of the game, Chip has his memories back, the Chaos Emeralds are restored, and Dark Gaia is sealed away within the planet. We get one of the most satisfying Super Sonic transformations. Chip saves Sonic's life, and Sonic lands in the exact same place he met Chip at the beginning of the game. He looks for the sunrise, takes a deep breath, and runs off to his next adventure. Sure, it's not much, but those payoffs do add to the quality of the story. Shadow Generations doesn't really have that. Nothing is set up, explored, or paid off. Like, what if we start with Shadow on the Ark, on his own, surrounded by reminders of his past, and after the adventure we find him at Sonic's birthday party, surrounded by people who care about him? Now that's a very basic example, but I hope you can see my point. The story needs a solid through line, a reason to exist, something to say. I don't think this is a terrible story, not by a long shot. It doesn't annoy me like Lost World, it doesn't make me sad like Frontiers. It's genuinely one of the best Sonic stories we've had in a long time. And I guess that's why I felt kind of disappointed by the end of it. The pieces are all there, I know there's a fantastic story in here, but it just never got there for me. It's not great, it's not awful, nothing more, nothing less. Now that Generations rewrite, on the other hand,